Welcome to the 5th episode of Uncommon Sense. I'm absolutely delighted to say that on today's episode we've got Jen Atkinson.
It's interesting because I reflect on my own success and what I've created, and probably the biggest defining thing is courage.
ITC just had this reputation of being a place that people wanted to go and work at.
I probably, looking back, burnt myself out from trying to be across everything. That probably created the worst episode in my life.
Jen is a very well-known business leader in the northwest of England. She famously took over ITC, the travel company based in Chester, and took it from loss-making to a £100 million turnover company in just a few years. Your brand also attracts the right people to come and work for you.
I think it's the elephant in the room, and it is a total challenge.
But if you have one piece of advice or uncommon sense that you would share with people from your career, what would it be, do you think?
I think probably it is uncommon. It's about
Hello and welcome to our 5th episode of Uncommon Sense, and I'm absolutely thrilled to say that today we are joined by Jen Atkinson, who is the CEO of Travel Scene, a new travel company, relatively new travel company, who's joined us. And when we started these podcasts a few weeks ago, we had an idea of some guests that we'd like, but I can safely say we've gone right to the top here, Jen. So it's great to have you. Thank you so much for joining us. I'd really like to start by understanding a bit about your career. You've been a very successful CEO and leader. And I would love to understand a bit about your story at ITC, which is a travel company based in Chester. There's a really interesting story for those people that don't know about that. So perhaps we could start by, if you could give a bit of history about ITC and how you took over, because that's a great story, and just tell us about that.
Absolutely, and great to be here. So, yeah, I started my career at ITC. I'm a marketeer by heart. So my career started in marketing agencies. When I was working in a marketing agency, I got headhunted for a travel business in Chester. And I lived in Manchester. I thought, I am not moving to Chester. I'm not commuting. Anyway, I went to the business, and it was luxury holidays. And I was like, this is the best business I've ever seen in my And the first job I had when I accepted the job was to go to Barbados to learn
Not
about
bad.
it. So
Not
I was like
start.
living my best life. But I was head of marketing. If somebody had told me when I joined that I'd end up being CEO, leading the business through private equity, having a TV programme on the BBC, I would have thought they were insane. It was not part of the plan. But I think as a marketeer, I always think that marketeers typically are the vision drivers for a business. I'm
going to agree with you on that one, yeah, for sure.
So, and I suppose my personality was where I saw an opportunity, I wasn't afraid to step forward. So I became part of the leadership team, and then sadly in 2009, I called it a perfect storm of crisis. It was a credit crunch. Mm-hmm. So the banking sector and the market generally was very tough. The business hadn't performed to plan, mm-hmm. and in fact the numbers were considerably worse than anybody had anticipated, and the founder, who was a great guy, Drew Foster, was diagnosed with cancer. And it was one of those moments where it was like, right, well, what do we do now? Right. Is it a case of closing the business? Is it a case of selling the business? And I remember going home, and I loved the people in the business, I loved the sector, and I was like, I've got a vision of what this business could become. And as I do, I sort of hand wrote a few notes on a side of A4, literally nothing more strategic than that, of how we were going to recreate energy, recreate belief, build back better, all that kind of stuff. And about an acceptable time the next morning, maybe 7:30, I phoned Drew and I said, I've got a plan. And he went, great, come and see me, I'll get a bottle of wine, which is always the basis of good strategic discussion.
At 7:30 in the morning.
Maybe not at 7:30, maybe we made it till 12. And I showed him this plan, and he went, yeah, brilliant, I'll make you CEO. And I was like, what do you mean you'll make me CEO? And he was like, yeah, you've got the energy, you've got the passion, and I'll be by your side. We'll go in and tell everybody tomorrow that you're going to be CEO. And I think at the time my title was head of marketing or head of sales and marketing. And that's exactly what happened. And I was 34 at the time, which I thought was very young at the time. I'd obviously never run a business. Obviously, there's tech entrepreneurs now that are 22 and very young running big businesses. But at the time, as a woman, I'd never run a business. It was a very well-established legacy business. It was quite a shock to everybody.
Yeah.
I think everybody thought Drew had gone entirely mad.
Right.
And then he announced it. And I wouldn't say I was greeted with unanimous well dones, which was my first surprise, if I'm honest.
Okay.
In a very female business, what I was greeted with was a little bit of jealousy, like, why you? And some probably more bitchy stuff around that as well. And I think one lesson from that is, when you put your head above the parapet and you say, I can, you've got to be prepared for people not to like you.
Right.
And that was really hard for me. It still is now. And I talk a lot to female business leaders about needing to be liked. And you can't always be liked. And particularly when the first job I had was to make redundant 40 people out of a team of 140. So the double factor of why you and then having to make some really difficult decisions was incredibly tough. And that was the first job. We asked everybody in the business to reapply for their job. We lost 40, I think, and we tried to do it. And, I did them all because I wouldn't ask anybody to do anything. I wouldn't do it myself. We managed to get the business stabilised to a break-even position in year one, which is amazing. We then had some really difficult banking pressures.
Okay.
I don't know if you came across a little banking function called GRG with RBS. It's quite...
I've heard the story about RBS at that time.
Yeah, it was really aggressive.
Yeah.
They were trying to wind businesses up.
Yeah.
And, they looked at me as a 34-year-old unproven gobby cow, basically, and thought... what have you, we're not going to back you. So I toughed it out. Yeah. So that was the first 12 months. We got it to break even and we sort of built up from there. And it was about marrying, I suppose, resilience, belief with creating a clear vision. So I often talk about that stage of we created a burning platform.
I like that.
It was like, if we stay here, we're all going to die. But here's a better desert island over there, and some of you come and swim. And so it was that balance of fear versus compelling vision, which got us through. And so that was the sort of first 12 months of my induction into leadership.
So I'm really interested, what a great story. I knew it was a good story. Thanks for sharing it. I'm interested to go back to the bit where you said you went home overnight and you thought, right, I'm going to scribble down some notes on a piece of paper and I'm going to take them in. That takes a lot of guts to do that. So I'm thinking about people who might be working in marketing or whatever today or other functions in a business. What gave you the confidence to be able to go to the person who was at the top and basically tell them, I think you're doing this the wrong way, or I can think of a better way to do that? Because I know a lot of directors wouldn't take that. How would you take that now, by the way?
It's interesting because I reflect on my own success and what I've created, and probably the biggest defining thing is courage. Okay. I think there's lots of people that had this great idea but never did anything with it, and the entrepreneurs that succeed are the ones that have the courage to do something about the idea they had. And I was and am brave, still am brave, why would I start a business in travel in a pandemic? It's kind of part of my DNA and my entrepreneurial spirit, I suppose. But some of it, truthfully, was naivety as well. And I think, I've said many times, if I knew then what I know now, I wouldn't have done it. And I think that's why, if you look at some of the most brilliant tech entrepreneurs now, they're so young because they don't see failure. They just haven't experienced failure and setback. So I think youth, without sounding like I'm prehistoric, but youth naivety is actually a real superpower.
Love that.
And I think that I really did not think through the consequences. I mean, I talk about my life of I'm a leaper. I'll leap off any cliff. Sometimes I forget whether I've got a paraglide behind me. And as you get older, you sort of think about the landing and will it hurt and all the rest of it. But when you're young, you just go, what's the worst that can happen? And I do have a bit of a mantra of rather fail trying than never have to tried at all, because that's when people become grumpy and resentful, and you see them all walking around shopping centres at the middle age going, if only, if only. So that was my motto, and that's why I look at lots of young entrepreneurs now, and I think that is the time to take the most risks.
I love that. I think if you said to me, what's the trait of someone who is thinking about setting up a business or, growing a business, naivety is probably not one that you'd think of immediately. But I think you're absolutely right in terms of, if I've heard startup founders say this to me, is if they'd known what was coming down the track, they would never done it.
And the other thing is you've got to trust and back yourself. The more you listen to other people, the more confused you can become. And it's great to take on board advice. Clearly it is, and it's wise to do so. But ultimately, you've got to trust and back yourself. With one or two close people around you, I would say. And at the time, and even now, I've had a few scars. I've learned the hard way. But I do back myself. I do know ultimately that what I do, I can win, or I can succeed, and I think that's another important. So you don't want to be kamikaze about risk taking and courage. So it's just making sure you back yourself and what you're good at, and equally know what you're bad at. And I really do know what I'm bad at, and making sure you cover those bases.
Would you be willing to share some of those sort of things that you think would not bad at, but things that you think? So I'm just interested to understand. This would be honest of you if you wouldn't mind sharing that. What sort of things would you say?
So I think I didn't listen.
Okay.
I tried to do too much too fast, and didn't always listen to what was doable. I thought the impossible was always possible.
Right.
I think I've learned to slow down a bit, and to have people around me that can do, as opposed to, I've got a very clear idea of where I need to be or where I want to be, but I'm conscious I get really, really bored with detail.
Okay.
I have, when people come and sit in a meeting, if it can't be said in 5 minutes, then I'm thinking about what I'm having for dinner.
Okay.
So, I laugh with some of my other business leaders about having ADHD. Okay. And I think it's a superpower. I've got really, really low attention span, but that's, if you flip it on its head, it's a superpower, because when I'm focused, I'm hyper-focused.
Yep.
So I think attention, I think sticking at something, which is so important in business. I have to put people around me that can pick up where I run out of steam. And one of the things which is quite funny, actually, is it used to drive me insane. People used to call me emotional. And I always got quite upset or emotional about that, because I was like, if I was a man, you'd call it passion, but because I'm a woman, you call it emotion. But the truth is I care, and I care a lot, and it can come across as emotional, but actually I see it as passion. But sometimes, you have to make difficult decisions. You can't always be popular, you can't always be liked, and I think that's that sort of, I suppose, wanting to be liked has held me back. And it's something I talk to lots of female business leaders, entrepreneurs, that and to be fair, most business leaders, they might say, I don't care if people like me, but it's not true. That makes them a sociopath, right, in my view. But actually, I think you've got to do what you think's right for you and the most, and not care what everybody thinks all of the time.
That's really, thank you for your honesty. That's great. So we're going back to when you took over ITC, then considering all those points, you're going in younger, marketeer, not the CEO. All of a sudden, you've got to get a team of people to follow you. Yeah. How did you do that?
I think probably, if I was to say, aside from courage and bravery and standing up, probably building a team around me that covered my bases was the best thing I did. Right. And there was somebody in the business that had been in the business a long time and knew a lot about the operational running of the business. And, that was important. But I genuinely believe we built a brilliant team. And these weren't people that we recruited, through recruitment agents. It was often people that had worked in the business that I just saw something in. And I see building a team it's almost like somebody you'd want to go out for dinner with. You know,
Yep.
it's somebody you want to be a little mini family where you all play different roles, but you all ultimately get on and trust each other. And whilst there's sort of a hierarchy, I don't love a hierarchy. I much prefer it to be, let's all be equals, and recognise that we all have different roles. So I think I definitely was blessed in building a team that covered all bases, and I think if I look to the journey that ICC went on, I think that team was it was an incredible era because of the team, and a lot of the success was down to the team, and hopefully I shared that with the team. It wasn't and it never should be a one woman or one man show.
So culture and the culture
Absolutely,
and values of the company was important to
Yeah,
you.
and I think that's true of so many businesses. I mean, culture is something that's thrown out so easily, and you can read all of the theory books and know it in practice. But you've got to walk the walk as well as talk the talk. And I think being what you want to see in the business is really important. And for me, that was humour, laughter, making sure that everybody had fun, everybody celebrated success together, but everybody worked hard, calling out when something wasn't working, having the courage to stand up for ideas, was kind of the tone that I hoped we set and still do now. I mean, I think you spend so much time at work, if you're not with people you like, in an environment that fills your cup, then do something else. I used to say it's not a prison. You can leave at any time, and work should be like that. It should be a place you want to go to with like-minded people.
Yeah. Well, I lived and worked in Chester for a long time, and I remember back then that ITC just had this reputation of being a place that people wanted to go and work at.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting as well, talking from a marketing perspective, we often talk about brand as being, the company and the logo and what you're showing outwardly to people. And I think it's really important that, and I think you've touched on it here, this idea that your brand also attracts the right people to come and work for you in your business. And it's almost like self-propagating, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if you've got a brand that works and that people can buy into, you're going to attract the right type of employees that want to come and work
particularly
for you and follow
when you're a service business, the people in the business represent your brand. And, you can't have people faking passion about service. They have to feel it in their bones. And we had 130, 140, how many the staff were, just sort of brand ambassadors of what we did, and service was everything, and customers were everything, and it you can't teach that on a textbook. It made it quite personal, and it did feel like a gigantic family, and that was lovely, but it could also be quite draining. And I think, coming back to one of your observations, is I probably, looking back, burnt myself out from trying to be across everything, and that probably created the worst episode in my life. Was I had two small children, so I took over ITC in 2009. I had my first in 2012, my second in 2014. I bought the business out of the family in 2000. I can't even remember the date. Maybe it was 2010. We did a private equity deal in 2016. So it all came very quick. We had the TV programme, and it all just was too much. And I suppose another reflection, and you see it, and we've, certainly in my generation, you've been told, women, you can have it all. You can have the perfect, let's do baking on a afternoon with the children, and have the big career, and I think the truth is it's very difficult, and I found it incredibly hard to manage the guilt between children, work, being across everything, and in the end that resulted in more stress than probably I could handle at the time, and I've got quite a high stress threshold, and I think that's what I observe with lots of women in businesses. It's fine, but unless you have brilliant at home support and nannies or whatever, it's tough.
So for any women leaders who are listening to this, what would your sort of advice be? I found it really interesting earlier. You said something about emotional, and if you're a woman, it's seen as a weakness, whereas if you're a man, you're passionate. And I think there's a lot of other areas of business as well where, you know, women are judged differently. And we were talking before we started recording about, you know, asking some questions about you know, being a female leader and how do you manage your work-life balance. And we talk about an unconscious bias. And I asked myself, if this was a male leader coming on, would it even cross my mind to ask that question? So in a sense, that illustrates the problem.
I think it's the elephant in the room, and it is a total challenge. You know, when women have families, I'm not saying it's not hard for men as well. It is. It absolutely is. I think the world has changed a lot, if I'm honest, post-pandemic than it did certainly in my time through the sort of 2012 to 2016, 17. I think now flexibility is a thing, whereas it wasn't. Working from home is common, not uncommon. I think that ability, therefore, to be able to do a couple of days productively at home and a few days in the office, I don't think anybody should work at home entirely, because I don't think cultures are built at home, and I don't think it's good for people's mental health. But I think being able to be flexible, and that change that the pandemic has brought has made it a lot easier. I used to, there was a really funny story. I used to find myself slipping out the emergency exit at like 4:30 to go and pick the kids up, because I didn't want anybody to see me leaving. And I remember I worked with a coach at the time, and she said, why are you going out the emergency exit? And I was like, well, and leaving your lights on and all that. And I was like, I don't want anybody to see me leaving. And she said, but why? And I said, well, it's 4:30 and I'm picking the kids up. And she said, what a brilliant role model you would be if you could really own that. And I reflected, and I was like, why don't I just walk out the front door and go, do you know what? A happy Jen, a balanced mum makes a brilliant leader. But at the time, and it still happens a lot in corporate world, you know, that whole notion of putting your jacket on the back of the chair so people think you're in, not turning your computer off. And I think if we in business can encourage balance and flexibility, and in turn go, if people are happy and balanced, then they're better in work, then that is utopia. And then I think women can have it all. But if women with children or families or all the rest of it, or anybody for that matter, but if it's something has to give, then that is not a great environment to thrive in, because eventually the thing that gives is stress.
Right. And
people, I think, they get burnt out, which is what I did. They get burnt out and go, why am I doing this? You know, there's more to, they get ill, or they give it up and open a tea shop down the road. And I think that's probably, that is the worst case scenario.
So it's interesting because you talked about values as well. And as you say, if you are proud about, you know, not leaving the office early and not, you know, feeling ashamed you're going to get the kids, what does that say to your team members about what we're about as a company? And that's what we stand for.
Yeah, and I think it's really challenging for leaders. I think it's a Richard Branson quote that says, the key to great leadership is to employ people you trust and then trust them. And it's so true, because I think people go, well, people will start taking the piss, or they'll, you know, everybody's going to not put a shift in. And that's really hard, because there are people that will always push the rules, have a sick day, work from home. Are they really working? Are they in the spin class? Whatever. So it is a challenge. And I work with businesses now that, you know, they struggle with that trust. But ultimately, if you can't have trust in a business, then you've got nothing. So you have to, without sounding like the Dalai Lama, you have to be what you want to see in the business. And if you're being flexible and you want everybody else to be balanced, you have to offer it all round.
I love that. Yeah, that's brilliant. On the same topic, you've previously talked about this idea of a confidence gap between men and women.
Yeah.
I suppose similar-ish to the sort of Sheryl Sandberg idea of like leaning in.
Yeah.
Is the idea being that you think, or you've previously said, I don't know if you still think this, but you know that men will just say, "Oh, sod it, I can do that, no problem," whereas women will often find a way to talk themselves out of it. Is that still something you think, or do you think that's changed as well?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely. I mean, the classic example is in raising finance. particularly private equity. So there's the horrible fact that only 1% of all investment capital goes to female entrepreneurs. It might be slightly higher now. And, there's a reason for that. And I've seen it myself. If in a business run by men, they know they need £5 million, the man will ask for 10 and hope to get 7. If the woman, she will have done a spreadsheet to go, do I really need 5? Maybe I should ask for 4. Maybe I'll ask for 4. And that's just the way, almost like the mechanics of the brain. And I suppose in that way, I'm probably more masculine in personality trait. And I think that's to be celebrated as well. My mum's German, and sometimes I'm seen as direct and all the rest of it. And again, that can be seen as a critical, but why not? I think this notion that there's male and female traits is so old-fashioned. Mm-hmm. It's like a man can have a brilliant feminine, emotional intelligence. That's great, but if you said that to a man, they'd go, "Oh God, no." And equally, a woman should be able to celebrate masculine traits, which is to ask and to be confident and to be, all those kind of binary sort of characteristics. And I don't think we should start saying, "Oh, you're girl." I think we just need to embrace what's brilliant about masculine and feminine traits. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't happen enough, certainly in the finance sphere.
So would your advice for female business leaders listening to this then be just go for it, just jump in?
I think absolutely, yes. Particularly when you're asking for finance or a pay rise or money or promotion or whatever, I think working with a coach in order to understand, if you're not intrinsically comfortable doing it, then working with a coach to help you ask for it is really important. And I think, again, in my experience, there's a difference between asking for it and seeming arrogant, which is awful, and asking for it based on a place of real belief and passion, and if we all win, we win together. And coaching has been a big part of my career. Again, if we want to lose weight, we go to the gym, we get a personal trainer. Athletes have coaches, but somehow in business we expect that we can do all of these things by reading a book or praying on a Tuesday or whatever. And I think you need a coach. Yep. End of. It's like an essential.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that because, well, two things come to mind. We had Stephen on our last podcast, and one of the things that he talked about was the importance of a mentor.
Yeah.
Surrounding yourself with great people, but also finding someone who you can look up to, who you can support you. And then I go back, another podcast we had with one of our directors here, Marlon, and he was talking about this idea of, in business, it's okay not to have all the answers to every question. And I think, so I'll ask you at the end of this, but we ask leaders what their uncommon sense would be. And his was, don't be afraid to ask a silly question, because too often in business, and I don't know whether this comes from life, whether it comes from watching politicians on the TV who we sort of expect them to have an answer to every single question. I think for me, when I think about what you've just said, there is no problem with asking for help if you don't know what the answer is. Is that something that you would agree with?
Absolutely. I mean, if you spoke to anybody from my ITC days, I would always say, you can really help me with this. A, people love to help people, and B, it was kind of just one of my natural questions because I didn't know. I think what I would say is, it takes quite a lot of confidence to be able to say, I don't know, but I'll find out. And I think people think you should know. And I think if you had a leader that kept saying, I didn't know, you wouldn't have too much confidence in them. The point is, I don't know, but I know a person that does, and I can find it out. So, yeah, I mean, I intrinsically have never been afraid of asking stupid questions or, saying, I mean, I've gone into different sectors where I don't have the industry experience, and I found it really interesting learning, because sometimes it's the obvious questions you ask in the sector where everybody just sees it one way because they've been in it for 20 years.
Completely, yeah.
So I think being able to get that kind of sort of like almost parallel thinking because you're not in it the whole time is actually quite helpful.
No, that's brilliant. I want to just go back quickly. You talked a bit about private equity and MBOs, and I know some people listening to this, business owners, will be thinking that those could be options for them to raise finance.
Yeah.
So you've done an MBO
Yeah.
and private equity.
Yeah.
I'd be really interested to get just some of your experience of those processes and what the difference was between the two and any lessons that you learned maybe.
Yeah, I mean, private equity has an important place in business. It does. For businesses to grow, it needs they need investment. I think it's something that you shouldn't approach lightly, and you should get really good advice on, because it's great when your business does well. Like with anything, any bank, any private equity, I always say it's a bit like having an umbrella. You only need it when it's raining. And actually, if everything's going well, then that's fine. It's when things become difficult that the challenges come. My private equity experience wasn't brilliant, but I reflect more on my own preparation for how well prepared I was for private equity. You know, I was used to, I described this family that we had at ITC where I was very much I felt like the matriarch almost. And when you bring private equity in, it's much more structured. It's you've got a different culture and tone coming to your board. And it's about understanding that, getting used to that, getting used to being asked questions that nobody's ever asked you before, which can actually be really helpful. But I struggled with.
Okay.
And I think, in truth, lots of entrepreneurs and owners do. You know, they've run their own business for a long time, and then somebody comes in boards and asks them questions, and they're like, "Why are you asking me that?" And so I think that there's got to be a cultural alignment and a fit. There's got to be shared goals. It's got to be more than money. Certainly in my case, it's great if everybody makes loads of money, but actually there's got to be more in it than that. So it's about, I think, having good advice, making sure that the board fit is good, making sure you've got a clear view of what happens when things go right and what happens when things go wrong. And this is where I said trust yourself, but having some good advice through the process is really good. I didn't, if I'm honest, and I wish I had. I think if I'd had me now in my life, I would be a bit more grown up, and I think that's why people bring on non-execs and chairs who've been through the process, that can sort of guide you, because it's a bit like my child had gone to university and was being brought up by somebody else.
Right.
And I did struggle with it, and it was a difficult journey. But not all private equity are the same. They come in different shapes and colour. But at the end of the day, they might tell you it's not just about money, but it is. It's about money and it's about return.
So you'd spent a long time building up the culture and the values at ITC, and then all of a sudden you're saying that there was less of a focus on that and more on the numbers or something?
I wouldn't say there was a less of a focus on culture, because that's a key that was a driver of our success, but it becomes more about KPIs that are very black and white and number related. And, you know, that has a place, and every business needs to grow up. If you're going to scale and become, you know, we were maybe 90 million at the time. If we were going to become 200 million or $1 billion, then the business has to have the processes and structures in place. But for me, it was just about grooming myself or being ready for that change. And I don't think I'd prepared myself enough for that. Plus I was burnt out. So that's why it wasn't a brilliant journey for me. Having said that, there's loads of businesses that do really well, but my advice would be get good advice, spend a lot of time speaking to different money options, speak to people who have got their businesses invested with them at length, and just do what you would do if you were recruiting, you know, an FD or anything, and just be really prepared and be really focused on what do we do if it goes well, what do we do if it doesn't go well.
Yep. So in terms of the MBO, different. It was earlier.
Yeah, I mean the MBO was just a turn of fate. I had tried to, so I ran the business for 3 or 4 years, and we got the business to $1 million profit from $1 million loss in 3 years, I think. So it'd been a brilliant turnaround. But I'd had my little boy at that stage, and I was like, I want to own this business now. And how do you buy a business out of an existing family? I had no idea. I was like, do I ring the bank? What do I do? And that's where private equity comes in. And when you're at $1 million profit, it's quite a hard business to get investment in. So I struggled. So I actually went on holiday to regroup and met somebody.
Great.
Who was an ITC.
It helps if you run a holiday company, doesn't it?
It's handy that. And he was
you
just
sort
like...
of see who's on the itinerary.
I know. I was like, I'll just follow him and her.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
And they were like, God, you've got a great business. You know what you should do? You should buy the business out of the family. I was like, funny you should say that. And he was like, I'll back you. Great. And honestly, we had the deal done in 8 weeks. And that doesn't always happen. But I do think luck plays a big part in business. And the better you are, the luckier you get. The harder you work, the luckier you get. And I have caught some breaks over the years, truthfully. Caught the break with Paul, the TV programme, but equally in similar vein, I lost. So with each luck, you sometimes can get unlucky. And, you know, the pandemic was probably the unluckiest bit.
Yeah.
Who'd have ever thought that was going to be a thing? You know, who'd have ever thought that travel would be stopped for 2 years? It's just inconceivable.
Well, that's brilliant. You've led me perfectly into the segue into Travel Scene. So Travel Scene's your new venture, relatively new venture. Could you tell us a bit about Travel Scene? What is Travel Scene? Yeah. So you left ITC, and then had you been thinking about this business for some time?
Yeah, I mean, I left at a difficult time. Obviously, the pandemic. I was going through a difficult time personally, and if I'm honest with you, I just thought I was ready for retirement. You know, the cake shop, the tea shop was calling, and I thought that was it. I've done my bit in business, and you know, I'll kick my heels and waft around the beaches in a caftan.
That sounds good.
Yeah, God, wouldn't that be nice? But very quickly, I'd always had this idea that travel was quite traditional. And in the pandemic, I really struggled. I'm a people person. I was used to being everywhere.
Right.
And I was on my own with the kids. And I was so, like, I felt so isolated. And my salvation was actually social media. And I think social media can be horrible in lots of ways, but it can be brilliant in lots of ways. And I found loads of inspiration on Instagram particularly. Mm-hmm. And I was just sort of looking around, and I grew up in an era of Judith Chalmers and Wish You Were Here, which is why I'd always had a passion to have a TV programme, because it was a thing that we did as a family, and we just got inspired by travel, and travelling is very inspiring. And I was like, the new media of choice is Instagram, and how can we use that as a media to inspire people to travel and get out there? And that was really the idea. And it was like, and me being me, I was like, how hard can it possibly be? I want to be the most followed travel business in the UK. I know a few celebrities. I know a few people that will back me. And that was also quite interesting because when I floated the idea, people were like, of course you're not going to run a tea shop, Jen. Get out there and get back into it. And I was like, oh, okay, well, the universe is clearly wanting me to do this. So I did raise some money quite quickly, quite easily, actually, to start the business. But starting a business is very, very different from taking an established business and turning it around, and it's hard. And those kind of hard yards of doing the establishment took me by surprise. It's not my skill set.
Interesting.
I would probably never start anything again from scratch in a pandemic. Although never say never. I thought I'd never work in travel again, and here I am.
Yeah.
So I brought some people around me, got some investment, and the idea is good. And I've just brought on board a new business partner, which is another exciting chapter. And I genuinely feel what we want to create is harness the power of influencers and social media in travel, create brilliant, authentic content, not sort of skinny people draped over a sun lounger, that inspires people, and that in turn we generate bookings either online or via a human being.
Okay. So in terms of the content then, is that, have you got some, how does it work? Do you, just so I can understand a bit better and our listeners can understand a bit better, so people go away and film their holidays
anybody. What's so amazing about the new world we live in is anybody's a content creator.
Yeah.
Everybody's a journalist. Everybody sees something through their own eye or their own iPhone. So it's just about working with content creators, authentic ones, who create inspiring content, which inspires you to go there and travel there. And I think one of the brilliant things about social media and the internet generally is it offers you choice. The downside is it's an overwhelming choice. Where do you want to go? The world's your oyster. You've got 14,000 different options if you go on to any travel website. So ours is about curated content where ambassadors who you believe in, buy into and follow have been seen, reviewed and given you reasons to go there. So it's kind of like a community recommendation. So if I am like you and you've been somewhere, then I believe that will be right for me. So I suppose it's not dissimilar to the ASOS, as seen on screen. Right, I saw that dress. Oh, I like that. I want that. Or I've seen this person. I buy into them and I've seen them on a beach and I want to go there.
I think for me, just listening to that, it sounds like it's very well placed in this new sort of, you'll understand this new sort of marketing dimension that we're entering with AI and AI generated content, and being able to go onto ChatGPT, and type in, give me a 5-star review for this hotel that's based in Barbados or something. And it will, I'm sure it will spit you out, however many words you ask it to spit out, and it will look like a proper review. I guess what you're saying is real human-based experience. Because experiences is what people are after.
I mean, technology is brilliant, and it's sort of making the world more efficient, more accessible in loads of ways, but it can't replace humans in the sort of authentic first-hand recommendation. And I think if we can harness all that's great about technology, ChatGPT, etc., but then have a personal recommendation on top of that, then that's really powerful. I think if we just live in a world where there's no journalists and everything's F4 on a computer, then the soul of the world is just, which sounds very dramatic, but it's almost like we're just avatars in some kind of movie, and actually we're not. We're people. We're going back to the Judith Chalmers thing. I come from retail travel agents, and the first thing I used to ask my travel agent when I was booking my holiday with the girls when I was 20 was, have you been there? Have you been to Falaraki or whatever dreadful place I was going to when I was 20? And that remains the case now. People, why are influencers the most important media trend? It's because people buy people.
Yeah.
So, and we're working with ambassadors. We don't call them influencers or content creators that inspire people.
Yeah, that's my personal view too, is, with AI growing as it is, it almost creates an opportunity for people to be more human.
Yeah.
The only way you can now separate yourself and your content from the millions of pieces of content on the internet is to almost bring that human element to the fore. And I guess that's what you're saying. Just
absolutely, and minimising choice. If you're overwhelmed with choice, I mean, I do it myself. I'm like, I go online and I see 14,000 of what looks like the same pair of trainers, and I'm like, oh my god, which one do I want? Sometimes we're all busy, we're all overstretched. We just want somebody to take that level of complexity away from us. So that's the plan for the new business. It hasn't been easy, because starting something from scratch is not easy.
Right.
And it takes a different level of resilience and self-belief than turning something round. But the same principles are true of any business. Have you got a strong vision? Is it compelling to customers? Have you got a great team? Have you got the belief in that team? And we have. And so, watch this space.
Yeah. And you got private equity support with this business, venture capitalists with this business as well.
Yeah, exactly. And, any business needs cash. I mean, it sounds pretty obvious. But if you're going to create something big and you want to scale it fast, you need investment. And I suppose it's in some ways easier to get investment if you've done it before. But equally, in this current climate, investment in a travel business off the back of a pandemic, in a not credit crunch, a cost of living crisis type of thing, again, it's not been easy. But we're well positioned to move forward now.
So in your position as a successful, business leader, there are businesses out there, SMEs in particular, who we work with here, but SMEs who are finding it quite a tricky time, almost, reminiscent of what it was like in 2009, 2008, 2009.
I think that's right. Yeah.
So what would your sort of advice be to those people listening to this, who are thinking, how do I get through this? How do I see a way through this?
Survival. I think, ultimately, it sounds really basic, but you've almost got to batten down the hatches because the storm will pass. And it always does. And after a really nasty storm, there's normally a really positive sunrise. So if you can just survive, cash is king, keep cash in the business, keep your good people, look at your costs, scale back, slim down, focus on what it is you're good at, focus on the core revenue streams, and just get through. I think it's a sense, but I feel like we're maybe coming to the other side of it a little bit. And if you survive that, there are always winners. And then you can, you'll have held on to some cash, you'll have held on to your brilliant people, and then you can push on. Yeah,
that's great advice. Coming back to Travel Scene, one of the things that you've talked about on this podcast and before is, the importance of mental health and mental well-being. So do you feel that, holidays obviously make people feel good, don't they? And I'm already looking forward to the ones I've got booked this year. So is that would you say that's a big benefit of Travel Scene and your company now?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a bit of a personal, reflection. Is I was very definitely burnt out, and I worked in what is a brilliant industry, travelling, etc. And I suppose people talk a lot about, do you eat right? Do you go to the gym? Do you get in fresh air, etc., etc.? But nobody actually talks about the power of having something to look forward to.
Love it.
And that's really what we're talking about. So how important is it for you to have 2 or 3 holidays in the diary at any one point? And I think if you ask 9 out of 10 people, they would say really important, because it just marks a break where you can take stock, be with your family, realise why you're doing it or whatever. Equally, not everybody can afford holidays, and I'm not saying that they all need to be to Barbados, but it's just about, I think there's a real movement towards being happy, and balance is the most important thing, and having the ability to go away, clear your head, clear the decks is really important. And I think if probably I'd had more holidays in my own life leading up to sort of the pandemic, I might have felt slightly different. So yeah, I mean, I ended up going back into travel because I love travel, truthfully. Yeah. I didn't have to, I didn't think I would, but I did because I think it's such an important thing in people's lives, and it is for me. I get most of my energy and inspiration when I travel, and that doesn't just mean abroad. The North Wales beaches are as good as anywhere else, to give you a sense of perspective. Yeah. On a sunny day, maybe, not a wintry day.
So if I'm looking to book my holiday this year, there are lots of travel websites out there and lots of travel places I could go. Why would I... I'm putting you on the spot here, Jen, so sorry, it's not a job interview or anything, but why would I come to Travel Scene to have a look at your website?
Because you have gone on to booking.com, whatever, and you can't decide what's right for you, and what you want to do is get some content and be inspired about something that's had a personal recommendation from somebody you think is like you. Is the first thing, and then you get to talk to a human being that understands what you're like and what you don't like. And then most importantly for me is I cannot bear doing my own EasyJet or whatever, and then somebody will take care of all of that for you, or you can do it yourself if that's the way you're wired up, online simply and easily, and you feel like that the price will be there or thereabouts, because nobody wants to feel like they've paid more than they should have for a holiday, for anything, but definitely not a holiday, because it's quite a price-driven market. So that would be why, we're not a unique way to book a holiday necessarily, but we're a unique way to inspire you as to where you want to go, would probably be what I would say.
I love that. So just before we finish then, It's been great. Thank you so much for your honesty. I think that's the thing that I've taken away from this most of all. But it's been a brilliant conversation, and I'm sure our listeners will have got a lot from it for sure. We always end our podcasts every week, and it's the title of our podcast is Uncommon Sense.
Yep.
And you've shared a lot of your nuggets with us already. If you had one sort of piece of advice, you've talked about naivety, I love that. You talked about resilience, you've talked about being confident, you've talked about values and culture and all of that stuff, which is great. But if you had one sort of piece of advice that you could, and you've talked about luck, I love that too, you know, but you make your own luck. But if you had one piece of advice or uncommon sense that you would share with people from your career, what would it be, do you think?
I think probably it is uncommon, is about trusting yourself and your instinct. I think we get too wrapped up in what we should do, what we could do, whatever. And it's more about reconnecting with yourself, why you're doing what you're doing, and backing the reason that you're doing it. So have a good old conversation with yourself as opposed to 14,000 people around a boardroom table and all the rest of it. So I think it would be about backing yourself and being really clear on why you're doing things.
Jen, it's been absolutely brilliant to have you on the podcast. Thank
you
you so much for joining us. I'm sure our listeners will have got a serious amount out of that, and we really, really appreciate you coming on Uncommon Sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.